Good afternoon. Welcome to the Long Beach Museum of Art. I always love saying that, but I really, I always mean it, but I really want to say that to all of you, being part of the museum family and being part of the arts community, which is so very important. So we are here today to talk with this wonderful man, Tony Marsh. I don't know that there's a saying in the museum world that it's easier to do exhibits with a dead artist. In Tony's case, it's not that case at all. It was a very collaborative effort on his part whenever we wanted to reach out to him. So I really appreciate everything you've done. To even talk about you more would just be, there's really nothing more to say, because these people here that know him, meet him, you know how special of a person he really is. So, and to my left is Shana Nys Dambrot. She is an author, she is a curator, she is an art historian, she is the editor for LA Weekly, and she contributes to many magazines, articles around the world. So we're really, really thrilled to have you here, and I know this conversation is going to be wonderful. I'm getting back now. Thank you, Shana. Okay.
Because we're here to talk about the life and art of the beloved and acclaimed artist and professor and thinker, Tony Marsh. Hi, Tony.
Hi.
Thanks for having me. It's true. So, as mentioned, I'm Shana Nys Dambrot. I'm the arts editor at the LA Weekly and other things. And I had the pleasure of coming down here and seeing the show a couple months ago. Seth Kaufman, who showed it, there he is, hi Seth, who's a dear friend and of both of ours, called me up and said, listen, I know everyone always says you have to see everything, you have to. He goes, I really, really mean it. He lives in Torrance, I live in downtown LA, this is in Long Beach, I don't drive a car. Seth was like, listen, you need to see this show. And I'm so not kidding that I'm gonna come and get you and drive you there. And he did, and Tony met us, and it was like one of those afternoons that is, you know, I love my job, in capital letters skywriting. It was such a gift and a beautiful exhibition and such an absolute privilege to be able to get the tour from the man. He let me touch a couple things. Sorry, Ron. And, but it was a really deep and beautiful experience, and then I was able to go and write about it. And then I witnessed the outpouring of love for Tony, of people going, yeah, you go, man, good for you. I've loved you for decades. You're my favorite. It's so great to see, you know, getting the attention, and I can't wait to see the show. I'm gonna go see the show again. And I don't even think I was prepared for like the love for you that I saw after simply coming to see a show and reviewing it for a paper, right? So then when you asked me to do the talk, I've been really excited this whole time, and that's my sort of I'm a fan spiel sorted. But I just, you know, everything about this show is so empathetic and full of love and resonance, and your person, like your thoughts, your philosophy, your life experiences. It may seem like it's abstract. Even when it's abstract, it's still narrative. It's so like you on a plate, you know, no pun intended, that I'm just very excited for everyone to be able to hear you speak about it more. So that's kind of my setup, fangirl, no gotcha stuff, all love. But I think before we get started, because the exhibition and then the very gorgeous book that we're here to celebrate the release of today, get your copies signed at that table at the end. He's got a silver Sharpie, it's pretty special. It covers 50 years, which doesn't seem possible, but somehow does. And the thing is, each series is very distinct from the other. It's not this sort of slow evolution with, you know, a little bit of transition. It's like there are distinct series. There are the commemorative series. There are the different kinds of vessels. There are the perforated works. There are the more architectural clay works. There's all of these different series. And finding a through line is not something you'd maybe be able to do with style, but you certainly can find the through line with intention and philosophy and your early influences. So I'd like to start there, and then we can go in and pull out how different series, maybe manifest that. But I guess, sorry for the long introduction, it's gonna be him now, is how would you describe those precepts? Like, what is the philosophy that you take through, that carries you through all of these different experiments, and where did that, or who maybe, did that come from for you?
Thank you. First, I want to thank the museum and Ron and all the people that have been a part of this. Yeah. And also, a lot of people have traveled to be here, flown on airplanes to be here. I'm a little bit overwhelmed by that, and very grateful for the sacrifice to do that, to be here, old friends and colleagues and things like that. So, and the weather held, right? I was so worried about rain, but here we are, and it's great. Thank you. And so, what was the question again? No,
yeah,
I know.
I know, you know.
I think this exhibition is a bit of a surprise to me in a lot of ways. Even though I made the work, I've never seen my work all together at once like that from different epochs. And going back 40 years as a serious maker, 50 years if you count high school. We got a little high school pot, right? That made it 50. And the interesting thing for me to see them all together like that was how, there is a through line that has to do with the ceramic vessel, but they're different. They're different concerns, different ideas, different materials, different methodologies to make them, different process, different way of thinking. There's a map through there that keeps changing as I go from moment to moment in the work. But the thing that was a revelation to me was to walk through the gallery when it was all set up, and to see those different bodies of work and to spend quiet time with them, because some things I hadn't seen for 30 or 40 years, 30 years. And to realize what stimulated each body of work and how present I was. No matter how different they were, I had to be really present for those things to become what they became, And I like that. I like the fact that so I think part of the through line, and so that's kind of what makes it authentic for me. It's an authentic journey through things. And the through line really is based a lot in curiosity. It's just curiosity about a lot of things I can't know, and curiosity about things I think I can find out, So that's been a huge kind of internal fire, because it's so easy if you're a person that's got curiosity. I was almost going to say curious person, But if you're a person that has curiosity, then that's easily stimulated by a lot of things, just very quiet moments and suggestions and whispers and And then if you know how to follow that stuff and not be too distracted, which is not always easy if you're teaching, and not be too distracted, you can take a little whisper and turn it into something grand, if you stay with it and follow it and just stay curious and stay in a little bit of, it's like a state of wonder, when you're working. And teaching is very public and communal. Making art's private for me. I've always been pretty private about it. And so when you're private, you get to engage this private world that you build, and it's a great place. And follow your curiosities and just listen to the work and listen to where you think you're going to go, and then you exhaust an idea. I exhausted an idea, and I would just find somewhere else to go. I think the thing that maybe horrified me more than anything was the thought that I might be making bad forgeries of my own work, bad copies of my own work, and that's the thing that really helped bring an end to things, here and there.
That exhausted the idea means like learning to recognize the point before it becomes that.
Yeah. Sometimes
like these are selling well, I guess I'll make them for another year.
Yeah.
That year is the problem, right? Stop when it's...
And certainly that happens, and there's all kinds of forces that operate on you that, put you in the position of making bad decisions sometimes, and But another thing that was really important to me, and I didn't realize it until now, but I've thought all along that nobody cared. Really, nobody cared about my work. That may not be true.
Mental.
But that's what I thought. Yeah, that's what I thought.
Wow.
People really didn't care, and that didn't hurt me. That actually released me, in a way. It was just like, I'm making this for me, and I'm making the things I want to make, and the way I want to see them. And I didn't really think anybody was watching. I didn't really think anybody cared. That's not true, but that was a mindset in the studio, along with curiosity, that allowed me to wander around and do things.
Well, I wonder though if one of the
Frank Lloyd cared.
Yes. I wonder if one of the forms that sense of cheeky liberation took was how personal you have been willing to make the series, right? And how open about how personal they are. I mean, it's like they're tied to significant life events, not all of which are joyful. And that, so when you were, I guess one of the questions I would ask is, were you knowing that, at what point in making series that were so grounded in personal life events, were you aware that they were? Was it like you got married and then suddenly you realized you'd been making, these two-part things? Or was it like, this has happened to me, I'm gonna go figure out how to embody that in my studio? Like, what's the order of that? Because each of the series has some story like that attached to it.
Well, I call those that grouping of work. You're talking about the
commemoration work, yeah.
Yeah, they were kind of like messenger vessels. I thought of them as, and a couple things happened. One was that I wanted to find a way to employ vessels, pottery, ceramic vessels, without making pottery. And so, and I also, like, for so long, we're steeped in deep history. Ceramics got deep history, and we have to deal with it. And people deal with it in all kinds of different ways, but I'm a lover of the deep history of pottery. It's pan-cultural, it's from all over the world, and through all of civilized time, it's got an immense, remarkable, profound history, and I love all that. But I didn't want my work just to be a reflection of deep history, and the mimicry of deep history. I wanted to actually try to bring it closer to me.
Yeah.
And the way to do that was to start to use it to tell stories about things I was experiencing in that moment, but I didn't want to personalize it either. It's not, I didn't put names on it. Commemorative vessels have got all kinds of great, like so-and-so got married on this day, and there's pictures on plates, throughout history, or the Greeks did it,
Yeah, sure.
But
that's not what you wanted to do.
I wanted them to be more sculptural, and I wanted them to be emblematic of very elemental things. The forms were elemental, the titles were elemental, the materials were elemental, the colors were elemental, fundamental, elemental, and so was the subject matter. And so I wanted that to be more like, so I'm going to pick things, so I'll pick things like coupling, or marriage, or fertility, or creation, or death, that are human experiences. I wasn't really conscious about it. This is the way it went, and it started to become understandable, and so I followed it as long as it was relevant, and so I made those pieces like that.
And I wonder, because we talked a little bit, we've been talking on and off, but kind of while we're on that section, because I think even though they all have an element of this, that section is the sort of most like overt or direct, the commemorative vessels. And one of the things we were talking about getting ready for today, and me asking you to go back to kind of like the beginning so we could lay out what's the philosophy, what's the mindset, is you said to me, I want to make sure to talk about my mom, right?
Yeah.
And aside from my heart, when we did start talking about it, and I'll let you do it, but I did not know until you just told me that she was such an accomplished dancer. And in the world of ballet, which is a world like ceramics, where there are rules and a very clear-cut way to do things right and wrong. And when you do it wrong, and like it's more so, I would argue, than other art forms. There's these rules that people are taught, and a thumbs up, thumbs down approach. And that's something you've been pushing back against your whole career, and thankfully in the classroom as well. But when you said ballet at the high level she worked at, ABT, that's similar in ballet, right? There's a right way and a wrong way, but then
There's only one right way.
how do you make it your own within that kind of idiom?
How do you?
And so that was the thing that sparked me, but I just want to I thought while we were on this part of your work would be a great time to let you do that.
Well, there's people in the audience that knew my mother, you know, that, she passed on in 2016, and so I was raised by my mom. I have a brother and a sister, and my niece is here. Where's my niece? There's my niece. She was raised by her too, you know, and my daughter's just walked in.
Nice.
She was raised by her too, and she was a remarkable woman, and who died at 94 years old. Started dancing at 14 professionally for San Francisco Ballet Opera, and so never went to high school. And I did the math, you know, and she really only ever did art. She was a graphic designer, a painter, a dancer, from the time she was 14 until she was 94. So she had an 80-year career in art. I just finished 30 years of teaching. Whew.
Right.
You know, she had 50 years on me. And she was remarkable. She was calm and sweet and beautiful with this intense fire inside her, you know, and that just drove her towards whatever kind of excellence she identified, whatever she wanted to do. She drew beautifully, she painted beautifully, she danced beautifully. And I think that, and so she raised us, you know. And the things that I took away from her, living in a house with this kind of human being, you know, the things I took away had something to do with grace. And for me, understanding grace through my mother was about knowing how to do things that were really complicated, really difficult, and making them look easy. That's graceful to me, and that's what she was, always.
Yeah.
And I was telling Shana earlier that really important lessons, you know. I got in an argument with her once when I was about 14, and she didn't want to argue, and she just said, I can't remember the argument. I remember what she told me. She just said, look, pessimists are buried in unmarked graves. And she walked away. I was like, uh-oh. You know, and that stuck, you know.
Nice.
And I also remember her telling me specifically that I should never do anything in life where I was expected to be rewarded for it. You should just do the things you really love doing without the expectation of reward, and do them as well as you can do them, and follow them as passionately as you can. In so many words, she delivered that message more than once, and she lived that in her life too, you know. So I also feel like, as an educator, I love artists. I tried to be a baseball player when I was young, and I hated baseball players. And I hated coaches. They're horrible people, you know. Sorry if it's I love baseball, you know, but baseball players, I just didn't. But I love artists. I truly love artists, and I love art. And that comes from her too, because we always had artists in the house. They were living with us, working with us, you know, we're feeding them.
Sleeping on the couch,
sleeping
whatever.
on the floor, yeah. And you know, you're talking about the 60s anyway, and there's a bunch of hippies, you know. But there was something beautiful about her like that, because she felt like artists were very special and needed help and needed protection, you know, and I took that from her. I felt that way about teaching and about helping artists.
Well, that explains a lot about how your students feel about you, I just want to say. Because to every single person I have ever come across who's come through your classroom basically says exactly that about you, okay? So I mean, it's a little emotional, but I mean, it's so strange to hear that echoed in like what I already, like I said, how I already know people feel. So that's, I think that's kind of like the only right answer in a sense of like why you taught for so long alongside your own practice. It's like, it wasn't just like, well, I needed some kind of job, and it's like, students. It was like, really, really a place of love and familiarity and comfort for you.
I love the studio. I love artists, and I love teaching. And it's not easy to be an artist and teach. Ask any teacher. It's actually very hard, and most people don't do it very well. And I don't fault them for it. It's too much. It's just too much.
Yeah.
You have to really love those things both to try to do both. They both suffer, but I was very devoted to teaching. I identify with being a teacher, and I identify with being an artist, although I couldn't call myself an artist for a long time. And I thought it was an exalted title that didn't belong to me.
He disagrees.
Yeah.
He's like, you're an artist, Tony.
Yeah, I mean,
But that explains a lot too, because this idea of like, again, there's the way of teaching that's like, you're here to learn from me, write this down, it'll be on the test, it's right or wrong, versus what is the opposite of that? It's whatever you do. It's like, I wonder what would happen if we did that, or hey, Mr. Marsh, or do you let them call you Tony?
oh,
Obviously. Tony, what do you think we would have? I can just see you going, I don't know, do it. Let me know what happens. And this idea of like teaching from a place where there's very little that's just completely actually wrong, if anything, especially in the classroom, and how, what a big deal that is. And how that is the same in your classroom and in your studio as well. There's no fear. If you don't care if you fail, if you don't even really admit that fail is actually a thing, a failure, then the stakes of giving it a try are not that high, right? You can do it, you now have permission to do absolutely anything, because if it doesn't work, you still learned something, great. And I think that's how that idea of curiosity that you mentioned manifests, I think, in the practice, right?
well, yeah, I mean, in terms of teaching, I've never thought about teaching as like where you teach somebody how to make a pinch pot, or you teach them a skill. I mean, you have to do those things, but teaching for me, honestly, as I understood it increasingly, it was about, I was there for one thing, and I was there to try to change somebody's life as a teacher. And so that meant to me, how do I find the tools to do that, And so we did travel, and we brought in artists, and we built a great facility. And I say we, not me. And it was about inciting. Teaching is about inciting, not just about teaching people tricks. It's about inciting somebody into doing something that maybe they didn't know they could do. So they're amazed by what they've done, and they're changed. So that's what teaching was about for me. And
well, because people who teach, they always say they learn more from the kids and the kids learn from me, and usually that's just like bullshit. But it seems like obviously kind of true in your case. And so, I mean, was there, and as we come back to like your work and the work in there and in the book, was there like, I imagine a kind of rich exchange between the kind of science experiment environment of the classroom and that going on in your studio, because when you get into the nitty gritty of, like, for example, the works in the most recent, the first room you come into upstairs with the gloopy, chunky, gooey color, rock, surface pattern, like all that, you were explaining some things to me like, well, there's this kind of glaze and this kind, and you're not supposed to put this one on top of that, so that's what I do now. And there's that moment of like something that would be a mistake, except
where are my
there's
students
no
laughing
mistake.
over there?
I hear the laughter. And so I apologize for my lack of precision on the terminology, but the idea of like, oh no, I know, because I can only imagine. Like, I'm thinking to myself like Nutty Professor, but art. But like the idea that, you're, the first line of the story I ended up writing about you is Tony Marsh does everything wrong. Because, that's where the good stuff happens, but then you still have to kind of give it some direction, and it's this kind of constant balance, right? Between you want to upend convention, but you would also like the sculpture to not fall apart in 6 months, please. So how you navigate like what has to happen versus what's possible, and doing things the wrong way, and experimenting, and archivalness, and like all of that stuff, I would imagine that the classroom would feed some of that science as well, right?
Well, I've never thought that my work was strong enough or good enough, really, to be at the center of my teaching. You know, I wasn't. There are teachers that are like that. They're so powerful.
Most, I'd say.
Their art is so powerful that can be at the core of how they teach and how they think. And we're state college anyway, so people coming in from all over, all, you know, I mean, the classroom's so diverse in every respect that it's not like a curated crew that you get to handpick at a private art college to come work. They want to work with you, and so, you know, it's so different than that I felt like it was really my job to try to surround myself with as much talent as I could find at the time. And I was able to find a lot of really talented people, far more talented than me, and I'm not being modest. That's one of them sitting right there. And for real. And that was a good thing. They're very diverse kinds of makers, and to bring artists in that were also additionally diverse thinkers and makers from all different backgrounds. And then the students had to figure it out. There was just a smorgasbord of opportunities, and it was up to the students to kind of gravitate to this or that and decide what was important for them. And as they did that, we could understand what their emerging voices were, and then we could work with them, you know, and help them become what they were supposed to become. And so
I love that. I mean, yeah, it's all, I'm a writer, so I'm like nerding out, but like it's just so interesting to me that the kinds of language to describe the different situations in your life are all kind of the same. Like what you just said about the students is also kind of like what you say about your materials and mediums. Well, I'm just gonna poke around and kind of like listen to what it maybe wants to do and figure out how to make it the best, whatever it's gonna be, that it like, there's a degree to which you talk about how you follow the materials lead in many cases. And you know, that's part of the...
Now I do.
Now you do. Ooh, that's good. Ooh, yeah. Okay, now you do. What happened there?
Well,
how did that?
10 years.
The last 10 years. Okay, what happened?
Well, if you go upstairs, you've seen the show that for like 20 years or 25 years, I made fairly similar kind of work. You know, it's all horizontal and open, full of objects and different stories. Those are the messenger pieces, you know. Mm-hmm. But in order to make those things, you have to have a plan, an absolute plan. And
the perforated ones especially, right?
Especially,
like that is,
yeah.
It already looks impossible, and it's more impossible than that.
I think the whim to make something, however ideas materialize, and I don't really sketch stuff out. Things just appear, right, in your brain, and that's the intuitive part. But then, in order to make those things, you have to have a kind of a craft map that you're going to follow to actually make that thing and come out at the end with what you thought you wanted to make, you know. And so there's a lot of craft protocols and there's a blueprint for your work. And I just had enough of that after 20 years, because I'm also intuitive, you know, and I wanted to be more intuitive, and I wanted to work in different ways, and so that's what happened. I just started about 12 years ago, give or take, and so that means that you just have to know where you're going to start. That's all. And then you're going to listen to the work. You know, you're not going to dominate it and insist it becomes this or that, but you just take a look at what happens, and then that tells you what you might do next. And that's really exciting, because if you're working minimalistically and with an increasingly minimalistic language, you're constantly paring stuff down till you get to zero. You know, there's a cul-de-sac there that you're going to hit. But if you're working intuitively, it's much more eruptive, and it's an upward fountain that kind of offers all kinds of possibilities, and you just pick and choose what's interesting, you know, and follow that and see what happens, and see what comes of that, see what comes out of that, see what comes out of that, and that's really exciting, and it suits me, you know, as much it's as pure for me a way of working, and I don't take notes, and I don't, you know, I don't want to. It's this pure way of working in its own right as, you know, working minimalistically with essential forms and essential form language and titles and concepts, and that was pure too. This is pure also in a way, but it's a very different look.
Well, I think like once again, even though the tenor of it might be different, but like once again, it's work about where you are in your life now.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, not that you felt that obviously that the teaching was something you needed to be liberated from. I mean, you stop at a certain point, but it wasn't like, oh, I'm so glad I'm out of there. It's obvious that you loved that, right? Yeah. But nevertheless, there's an other side of that is definitionally more free.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting that that's coinciding.
Yeah. Well, a lot of things in my life changed, and I think artistic courage is the hardest thing to find. I mean, all artists here will know that, right? Because what are the boundaries on that, and what are the benchmarks on that, and how do you always feel like I always feel like I'm some kind of artistic coward. Again, I don't know if that's true or not.
No one else thinks that.
It's the way I feel. Yeah, it's the way I feel. So that it's really hard to understand.
Well, I think when you say it's really hard to understand, I think that actually maybe that is a hint at what I might otherwise be able to identify but not define as the kind of emotion in the work, right? Because it's like you feel it, but it's not assertive. It's just full of feeling. And what is that feeling? And each series with a different feeling. And the feeling of the new work is the feeling that's this moment right now. And whatever you're feeling right now, which is so apparent, that's what's animating that work. That's what's coming through your hands into all the sort of crazy, eruptive, excellent word, aesthetic of those pieces. But, that's what the work is mirroring now, in a way, in similar fashion to the way that the other work mirrored the marriage, birth, mourning, or that other work, the early ones that where you drafted, now the elements of nature into it. And you're like, I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to put it outside and see what happens, or right? And rust, which is actually technically alive, right? So all that stuff, that was like very early on. But I think, again, even through all of the diverse optical styles, right? The different looks, the different aesthetics of each series, that these are the things that kind of hold it all together. And I think each one doesn't have only a story, but a set of emotions that maybe doing the work is how you, Tony the person, understands.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? And then that is in the work for all, forever.
Yeah, it's a mirror, work's a mirror. However obtuse it is, it's a mirror. And, but, back to my mother, she died at 94. She was painting up until 2 months before she died. But she was, suffering from dementia, and so, but still painting. And she would go get her old paintings, which were figural and very accurate, representational painter, very beautiful. And she'd go get old canvases, and she'd paint over them. And she would paint over them with these wild colors and these abstractions, and put glitter on them, and we couldn't really talk about it because we weren't having those, that kind of conversation anymore. But I was like, wow, 94, and blowing up, so much energy, so much life energy coming out of her work. It's like, that's how you do it,
That's how you do it.
And if you look at my early work, it's like I'm chromophobic, I was like, colors, Because what does color mean? I mean, color is so powerful and so strange and so elusive. And
well, it's elusive, but it's also so specific. It kind of, because of its emotional cues, it narrows the experience somewhat.
Sometimes,
if it's bright red, that's going to mean something different than if it's glossy black or robin's egg blue, and that's.
And my work was so much about form. I didn't want to just subvert that by superficially putting the color on it just to decorate it. And so I never used color. And I think my mother, I was like, God, I got to deal with color, you know.
Yeah.
And I have been in it. The thing that's wonderful about ceramic color is that it's got its own chromatic language, apart from all other kind of art forms and color and materials. And there's something very special about it because it's phenomenological. You know, there's so much shift and change and metamorphosis, but between when you apply it, like painters get to apply paint and it's wet, it's one color, it's dry, it's another color, and they can control it. Painters control color, most of them. And
But you,
ceramics, no. Yeah, I mean, it's one color
kinda
now.
I mean, how much do you know? Like someone as advanced as you, does it get easier to predict, or are you still just?
Yes, but the more, for me, the more predictable it is, the more I want to subvert it so I can see something I've never seen. And that's hard, you know, and it just kind of means I have to do stuff I've never done and think in ways I haven't allowed myself to think. When you're trained in craft, you know, the pottery protocols are ferocious. They're ferociously built lanes that you stay within until you don't, you know, and for good reasons they are, you know, and so I came up through all that in Japan, and you know, and so they worked for me until they didn't, and so I had to break all that stuff. And I was saying to you earlier that if you work for a long time, it's really interesting because. Especially if you work consistently for a long time, you build institutions to your work. Your ideas are institutions that get built into the work, and the ones that stay, they don't go away, they stay. Those are true institutions to your ideas in the work. They're built in. And as soon as I did that long enough with any body of work, and I could really identify institutions that wouldn't go away, then I could break them. And because you see them, they're clear, and you understand them. Then you can move, you can push against them and move in a different direction and change things. And that's a rich way to work for me. And I didn't understand that for a long time, but I just naturally did it. Yeah. I did the same thing as a teacher. You know, I wasn't happy with the way things were. I didn't like. We have a great curriculum, by the way, at Long Beach State. It's great. It's so comprehensive and beautiful in a way, but I didn't like it. It wasn't enough, you know. So I brought in guest artists, so we traveled and stuff. And is Chris Miles here? I think he's here. There he is. Yeah. That's my colleague. That's my dear colleague, Chris Miles. And,
my former colleague. Your colleague now.
Yeah. and so things like some of you may know about the Center for Contemporary Ceramics. You know, that was, what that was an activity or something, you know, I don't know what to call it. It was a habit and an activity to bring people to campus and stuff. And Chris institutionalized it, did all the hard work to do all the reams of paperwork that I would never do. And to institutionalize, I wasn't capable, you know, for one thing, not just not wanting to, but did all the hard work, you know, it probably took a year, and to move it through all the committees and institutionalize it so it's there, and raise money so it's there, and it'll be there past when I'm gone, and so that's really wonderful, you know. Yes. And it's going to benefit a lot of people for a long time. But I was pushing against what was there to allow other things to happen, because it seemed important to round out. Someone came to us for an education, you know. Yeah. That's a big deal to me. I took it really seriously, especially our students, you know, who are first generation of college frequently. They all work 2 jobs, their parents work 2 jobs, you know. And so we wanted to give them more than they bargained for. So we brought as much to the table as we could, and that's part of it. But
I love that.
I'm only good at so many things, and I think they got great colleagues like Chris Miles. Yeah.
Well, here's my question, like vis-a-vis putting something like that together. So over the course of your career has coincided, and I would argue at certain crucial times, itself advanced a elevation of ceramics into more of a general consciousness, but also as, you know, something that deserves to be in the fine art conversation, that arguably always has been, but certainly in the last few generations, and definitely in the last decade, has really begun capturing sort of the hearts and minds of, like, you know, the mainstream art world, not craft, not art adjacent. Not even a conversation about design and functionality, but just like sculpture, okay?
Yeah.
Right? Just sculpture that's made out of clay. It doesn't have to be sort of like we used to say art and photography.
Yeah, right.
Right? And so that idea is, you know, you have seen that change, like from the front row, tracking your career. So I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about that and sort of, you know, what you think that's about, and if you are optimistic that we're sort of here to stay with that. I think it's gone on too long. It's a couple generations now, so it's probably not a phase. I certainly hope not. I love ceramics. I have a theory that it has to do with a backlash against everything being a tiny flat screen now. Everything's virtual, everything's on your computer. Like, what's the opposite of an Apple Watch? It's one of those sculptures, it's a goofy ceramic pot. So, you know, there's all that, but I think this has been something that's been coming slowly for a long time, and it took longer here than in other parts of the world. So if you could maybe just, would you talk about how when you were in Japan, it was more central, it was more appreciated, you know, whatever. But like, if you could maybe just talk a little bit about how you saw that come into being.
Well, I wish Frank and I were 20 years younger. I'd take advantage of this, you know, because I was showing with Frank Lloyd in the 90s or the 2000s. And Frank was actually trying to change the paradigm by working with people, all kinds of people, Larry Bell, Robert Graham, all kinds of people, and painters, and starting with clay people, you know, that came out of the high craft movement, Ralph Becerra, Adrian Sachs, but also working with Violet Fry and, you know, people like that. And so things were changing. Frank was trying to change stuff, but it was really hard, especially he could do it in a gallery, but it didn't necessarily mean that the craft still, we were still relegated to the craft a lot, you know, especially if you made vessels. And so that even meant if you're going to go into a museum collection, the decorative arts is where you're going to go, you know, and the decorative arts curators were going to look at your work and talk to you, but no one else. And so all this has changed, and I agree with you. I think a big part of that has to do with the fact that the cool, reserved, intellectual, digital, you know, we're all mammals. We're mammals. We're warm. Yeah. We're warm-blooded. And we're tactile. And ceramics, working with clay, is nothing but that, really. And it's kind of a remarkable.
And fire and earth and, you know.
All of it, yeah. It's a great recorder, and it's alchemical, it's alchemy. It's a lot of things that are hard to explain, hard to understand, that relate to natural science, relate to the natural world. So they're kind of mysterious and magical and universally so. And so there's that. But then also what started to happen was that artists with credibility as artists, starting with Picasso, you know, started to work with clay because it's such a fascinating material. And de facto, or by them doing that, they gave a certain level of credibility and interest and brought new eyeballs onto clay that wouldn't otherwise go there, and gave it credibility kind of as a more legitimate art form than it otherwise would get when it's kind of trapped in the high craft territory, which is very small, really. And so this kind of perfect storm of all that, and I think dealers looking for more stuff to sell, you know, really. I mean, and ceramics is still not that expensive, you know. And so this perfect storm happened, and as culture evolves, that it allowed ceramics, people working with clay, to have a seat at the table, you know. And you know, so we saw that happening a lot, and it was one of the things at the Center for Contemporary Ceramics that we've been very interested in, and because Southern California is been a serious hotbed for where I was educated on the East Coast, and you should hear them talk. They think they invented ceramics, you know. They didn't. Contemporary American ceramics was not invented at Alfred. Sorry, Alfred, love you, but it really happened in Southern California and Northern California, and almost exclusively, you know, with really brilliant people, and who had some guts and changed things and opened up things. And so we have that in our DNA here in Southern California. And we've got this great facility at Long Beach. And so it seemed very natural to kind of open the doors and bring, most especially artists in that were mature artists that had good ideas, but maybe had some contact with clay, maybe not, and to let them work and to help them and take our craft wisdom, our craft knowledge, and help them make their work with a thought that that would make things better in Southern California for ceramics and art in general. So we take on all comers, just all comers. You want to come work, do it, you know. And make things better, culturally better in the arts for ceramics in Southern California and radiate out beyond that for our students, for ourselves, for the artists, for everything. We just felt like it was a win-win-win, you know. So, and is it going to stick? I think there's, you know, the art world's run on so much fashion and trend that keeps rotating through itself and changing and taking left turns when it's supposed to take a right turn, and I don't know, you know.
Yeah, of course.
And I think that there are a lot of things that, you know, will get an opportunity to have a seat at the table, but they better be good. There has to be something there, you know. There has to be some substance. If there is, it'll stick. If it's not, it won't.
Yeah.
Just like art, just like painters, you know. And so I think ceramics will never go away. People love it too much.
Right.
People love to do it.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
going to always be there in some form. And I think it's taken increasingly serious. I don't see it going back to where it was for sure, no matter what.
I think the genie's out of the bottle
Yeah.
or the toothpaste or whatever you say, but that the idea that you know, and there's always been like a few lone heroic, you know, blue chip, your Andrew Lords, your Edmund DeWalls,
Yeah.
whatever, right? And I mean, no shade, love Edmund. I mean, like he's a lovely human being.
Yeah.
And like you, oddly very, very tall and narrow, like you. But anyway, that
Like his work.
I like his work, but you know, the idea that like, you know, people who are out there willing to speak conceptually about their
Tall
you
and
know,
narrow.
He is. Well, skinny,
No, I
such
know.
as but he's like, you know, I mean, because you are anyway. They're laughing because they know I'm right, but that idea that, you know, it's not about being able to name the 5 artists anymore. It's like people
way.
who were painters or any kind of artist suddenly feel compelled to themselves, you know, experiment with clay for themselves. Like there's something that draws people in, even if it's not what they set out to study. And I think that is something that I think people either intuitively or maybe even, you know, fully articulatedly understand is about all of the things you just said, about the physicality, the alchemy, the natural sciences, the sort of undeniable object.
It's
of
also increasingly decentralized. There's not a small group of people that are controlling everything. There's not a small group of artists that are working in a form of expression that's going to time out and then be over.
Yeah.
It's so decentralized. There's so many factions and so many ideas and schools of thought and ways of working that it's an ant farm that got loose, you know.
Yeah,
And
in a good way.
Yeah, and it can't really come to an end.
No,
You know?
excellent. Well, I love
Yeah.
that. That
Yeah.
makes me happy, and probably all of these folks
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
We're going to open it up to questions in a minute, especially because there's so many artists here. And as I always say at these talks, artists always ask my favorite questions because it's stuff that I would have never thought of. So if you have questions, be thinking of them. That'll be in a second. I guess, you know, the real, so you're still working in the mode of the most recent work. Like if you were in your studio, are you working on something that you're still in it with this new sort of volcanic, eruptive, almost Fauvist kind of thing that you're doing with what we see in the entrance, or are you already on to something else and we just don't know it yet? Like where are you in the studio now?
Well, in the studio, I'm working on a big project that's not really related closely to this. It's other work I'm doing for someone else, but it may influence me because I've been in deep on this stuff for so long now, intensively every day, and so I'm starting to think about how I can take what I'm learning about that and shift it into other things to grow the vocabulary upstairs. And I think, you know, you mentioned something about failure, and that's been really interesting because nobody wants to fail. You know, I mean, we're taught not to actively try to fail. I think that's that's part of staying alive, right? I mean, so it's very, very deeply ingrained in us not to take unnecessary chances that are going to cause failure. So you have to contend with that, especially with ceramics, and so as I've kind of changed over the years, I've had to learn, even as I went, to say, oh, that's interesting when something falls apart. I mean, I've always been willing to trade my work for some knowledge, some information. That's a great trade. I'll trade it all day long. But there's also things that go on that you're taught are just horrific. They damage the equipment or they wreck your, and somehow I'm starting to look at that stuff like, well, I've never seen that failure before. That means I don't know what to do. That's great, for someone as old as me. And that's great, because now I'm going to have to deal with that and create my way out of this, and who knows what's going to happen. Could be great, So failure is a really interesting thing. We grow up trying to avoid, and now in relationship to art, when I'm making, my arms are open to it,
Who knows what's going to happen? It could be great.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you never know. I mean, that's part of the kind of the sense of wonder about working with a material that's alchemical the way I do it, these days, and it's like alchemy. So you're always trying to make gold out of lead, or just find something that you've never seen or never done, or that's wonderful. That's worth getting up every day to see what's in the kiln, Yeah.
Oh my God, I love that so much. It's so pure. And I think that, the ability to talk about it that way and to make work that way, that is work that people want to see, right? So, check. It's,
hopefully.
You know what I mean? I don't want to just say beautiful, because it's actually so much more than beautiful, but compelling, aesthetically compelling work that, won't fall apart immediately, where you've learned something, is
Work teaches.
right? I mean, if that's the gift,
yeah.
rather than say, like, I'm going to be the master of everything, and then I'll be done. It's like, thank God I found something I don't know yet, and I can figure it out.
This way of working is kind of not an end game,
That's amazing. And I think talking about it that way is the thing that will keep it and deepen the roots in the fine art discourse. Because when you start talking about things that are one-off and gestural and intuitive and, hard to replicate, and, it goes way beyond that conversation about whether it has any function, and into a conversation where the language and the process is identical to a conventional understanding of, like, what happens in fine art, right? And so if you were talking about painting that way, nobody would think that was weird.
Yeah,
and so to be able to just include clay-based work in that conversation about contemporary painting and sculpture, like, that's the way that that relationship will, that place will continue to flourish, I think, and
agree with
deepen.
that, yeah.
So thank you for that, as well as everything else. Unless there's something that you wanted to say, and then the people. Okay.
One more thought, and then let's have questions. And I think watching my mother again, this will be the last time I love my mother,
I
miss
love your
her.
mother too.
I miss her.
Just from what you've said today, she's.
But watching her change her work like that, from figuration to abstraction, complete abstraction, it was color driven and energetic mark making and glitter, yeah. That was also really struck me, and because I grew up shy, I'm less shy now, but I was very shy for a long time. It was hard. I can't wear colorful clothes or I wish I could. I love people that do. I admire them so deeply, but I don't want to draw attention to myself. So my work was very, very quiet. Very organically, organic earth tones and stuff like that, and for years. But it's not anymore. And somehow the idea that I can make work that's a contradiction to the history of my own work is also really interesting. I opened the kiln and I was just like, that is a clown show. It horrifies me. So let's take it out and look at it,
Yeah,
and to somehow allow myself to do that was hard, after so many years of being stylistically in a groove. That was really valuable, though. I understood that the the value of embarrassment, you know, and contradiction, and there's a huge value in that. And being able to contradict your own sense of good taste is become very important to me. It's not like I'm trying to do that at every turn, because as new things emerge, I want to develop them. I don't want to just keep bouncing around, you know. But I'm more willing now and more open to the forces of the universe, you know. Whatever happens, I want to see it, deal with it.
Excellent, which I think is just, I mean, that's an amazing lesson, well beyond a ceramic studio, and like probably all the way through
In
all
life
of
too.
life.
Yeah, life too, yeah.
Definitely, so thank you for that. Yeah, I wonder what'll happen. Maybe it'll be great.
That's right, yeah, maybe it won't, but maybe it will,
That's
yeah.
the philosophy.
Yeah.
I'm gonna try to remember that for myself too, so thank you for that. Okay, it's question time.
There's a couple of people in the audience who are not allowed to ask questions. Wes, where's Wes? Yeah, that guy's dangerous.
Okay.
He's a student back. He's,
Security.
He's way too smart. Yeah. Security.
Seth's a troublemaker. He's hiding.
Yeah.
Chris looks like he has something to say. Oh, yes.
It's actually very personal.
That is a great question.
Yeah,
so
I mean,
good.
it's very perceptive.
Yeah, and the right angles thing is, yeah.
You know, ideas are weird, and artistic ideas are weird, how they emerge, and for almost 30 years, everything I made was a soft. There was soft organic geometry and no right angles anywhere, no hard, you know, right turns or straight lines were because they're so hard, and there's something about softness that I was interested in, and those are the hardest things to do, to make a straight line and a pure right angle, and I'd never done it, and so I wanted to do it. And it coincided with a bad time in my life. A lot of bad things were happening around me and my family and to me personally, and it was just very, very hard. So I was able to bury myself in that work, and it was actually more work than the perforated to make those. They're all handmade. It's all handmade, you know, and so they're all hewn from blocks of redwood, hewn from blocks of terracotta, which is a very base ceramic material. Just look behind you and over here, and so I kind of like the purity of it, and I like being lost. I get up early in the morning and work on them. That's almost 2 years worth of work there, and then it was all reductive. You know, everything was reductive. And actually, if you look at it, it's kind of a mess in there, but it doesn't look like a mess. But it's all hand done. It's all handmade. You know, and then I had about 10 of them or something out of 12 of them, and I wanted to exhibit them, and no one would exhibit them. The people I was working with at the time wouldn't exhibit them, 2013, 14, like that. And they just said, well, I'm sorry, it doesn't look like your work, you know. I was like, it doesn't look like my work? It's a vessel with stuff in it, you know, come on. But they wouldn't exhibit it. And so that's the only work of mine that I have. I've kept it. And then I would give them away. I give them away to auctions to raise money. And they didn't even sell for money. and I've been trying to get them all back now. I want them back. I love those things. I think they're really important to me. And it's the only work of mine I've ever kept. I've always sent my work out in the world to do my bidding, you know. And so they were really important because they allow me to get lost. I wasn't making perforated work. It was it's a very labor-intensive things are interesting because they're acts of devotion, and there you become lost in the universe of those things as you're inventing them and making them, and there's something wonderful about that for me. It's very private and quiet and cerebral, and it's not meditative though. You can't meditate. You have to focus. It's really highly focused work, the perforations and making that work, and I like that. I like trying to be alert for extended periods of time and deeply engaged and whatever it is, you know. So that explains those, and I've been getting them back slowly. Ron's going to give me back the one he has, right? Trade me back, you know.
I'm not sure Ron knows that.
Not now, yeah. All right.
Amazing. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, no, you're right. The wonderful thing about a show like this for me is that it's this authentic map of where I was, what I was doing, what I was thinking, how I was making, and then the evidence, you know. enough to convict me in a court, I hope.
Right.
You know?
Well, you talk about how, I mean, when we've spoken, you've talked in other places, and about how, what do vessels do? They contain, right? So what are these containing if it's not water or salt or grain? It's containing emotions and
Ideas.
biographies
Yeah.
and, right. And so that's still so true to their function. And then, well, what shape does it need to be to contain what it's containing?
Right.
And it's, if you want, I get a little nerdy as a writer with the way that language, exists, alongside the work, but like that kind of thing makes me really happy to be able to really understand that it's actually in one way quite subversive of that tradition, and in another way is completely fulfilling it. And, I think that's, what's interesting is I think, your work is, like much of the best artwork ever made, is more than one thing at the same time.
Has to be.
And some of those things contradict each other, but they're there, but they're true at the same time. And the human brain doesn't naturally take to paradox, but when you find and recognize one and do the thing where you hold it in your mind, and that's kind of art's superpower anyway, to contain a paradox. And so I think, part of why it's so much fun to talk about your work is because it's something that always keeps going. It's like, it's this, but it's also this, but then it's also this, and and it just kind of keeps rolling through the many things it is. And I think that's kind of, where some of the words like alchemy and other things like that, feel really right.
Well, there's things that are very knowable and
Yeah.
very recognizable, and then there's things that are not knowable.
Exactly.
And I think the better works would have that.
The better
contain
works have
that.
both, and
Yeah,
that's,
right.
yeah, exactly. Oh my God, I'm so excited. Okay, yes.
Thank you. That's a very nice question, actually. And I don't think I've ever been. I don't recall ever hitting a brick wall, where I didn't know what to make, or I wasn't excited about something or curious about something. I think I've really been lucky like that. And the interesting thing is, like, there's kind of a magical rhythm you enter into when you're making things, especially when you make them kind of unself-consciously, or you're not overly intellectualized, and they're just pouring out of you. And that's a special moment. Those things happen for a while, and where you're making unself-consciously, and you're making them. And so you create this body of work that's emblematic of that moment, and that kind of the place that your spirit is in that moment. And then time passes and other things take over, and you try, and other things happen. Well, going back to that is almost impossible, unfortunately. People have tried to pay me money to go back to that. I can't do it. I'd do it if I could, but I can't. When it's over, it's over. It comes, it's magical, it gives you it offers you something. You work, you live through it, and I think you get older, you recognize how special that is, and you want to just live through it and live in it as much as you can before it takes off, and then something else replaces it. So it's impossible to go back to those things, I've found, and really make them with the true. There's a piece up there that I did remake from 2009. It was sent to Chicago and it broke. And I love that piece so much that it's a perforated piece with all the spheres on it. I love that piece so much that I thought it should be in the world. I wanted it to be in the world, and I was going to make it again. It was like crazy amount of work, It took me 10 years to figure out. I was like, okay, I have this show coming. I'm going to do it. I want it to be in the show. And it's nothing like the first one. I understood how to make the perforated pieces even better technically. So technically, it's a little better, but didn't have nowhere near the spirit of that first piece. There was no way to reclaim the spirit,
Like every love story about trying to revive your dead, sweetheart,
Yeah,
right? Like,
yeah. There's
Corpse
something about the
Bride.
spirit.
No, but
you
in
make
all
stuff
seriousness,
with,
it's like it's living, and you can do your best.
Yeah, you're in it.
But
You can't go back to it very easily.
yeah.
Maybe some people can, right? But
Well, you can.
I can't. Yeah.
Right, and that's part of.
So you keep falling forward.
So
I can't rely on what I've done in the past so much. I have to keep moving forward, actually, to do good work, I think.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's its own depth right there.
Thank you, though. Nice question.
Oh yes. Water in the future.
Water. Yeah, I call them water series because they're some of the first things I made when I came back from Japan. And I had been I worked in Japan for a potter for 3 years, and I was in school before that for 6 years, and I couldn't believe that finally I didn't have to listen to a teacher give me an assignment, or I got to make my work. Oh my God, I had a studio. I found a studio, and I could actually make what I wanted to make, and I was so excited, and I was working with porcelain. And I was throwing on the potter's wheel, and I was making, and I just come back from Japan, so I was lost anyway, you know, like, and I was cutting chunks of clay out of a bag of porcelain, and porcelain's such a great recorder, you know, it records everything, thumbprints, everything. And I was cutting chunks of clay off, and I take it up and I look at the wire cut, and I was like, wow, that's really nice. Then I just do this and throw something, and eventually I thought, I got to deal with that. You know, I got to act on, I think that's so important for, you know, to the students, like, you have to learn how to act on the things that catch your attention, not just admire them. If you just admire those things, you're a philosopher, you know. But if you want to be a visual artist, you actually you act on it artistically somehow, however that works, you know. And so I started making these things and figured out a way to kind of scale it up and embody it and engineer it. And it took about 2 years to learn how to make those things. And those are the first things I made after coming back to the States and trying to claim authorship of my work, you know, invent authorship of my work. So those are the first things I made, and I was up in Mendocino, which is very beautiful. And I was looking at sand dunes and water and stuff like that. And so I called it water because it looked like water, but it was really me just inventing something that I caught notice of and acted on and kind of grew it up over a couple of years. Yeah.
A process which has come to serve you well
It's
in subsequent decades.
Yeah, how to grow an idea from
idea.
a little whisper, you know, like a symphony out of a whisper, and it was a great lesson I paid attention to and really valued. And so you learn to listen to things, you know, and see small things and see delicate things and take them in and then work with them, you know, not just admire them.
Right.
You admire a lot of stuff too.
So it's just yet another reason why it's amazing to have them in the show.
Yeah. Oh.
Because that's what happened.
I'm going to tell you a real quick story.
Okay.
If you guys don't mind.
They're
They don't
getting a
mind.
little chilly, but they're all right.
You okay?
Yeah.
So the Weston family up in Big Sur owned a lot of my
I
work.
wanted you to tell this story, but I wasn't sure if I was allowed to know the story or
which
not.
one?
Okay, the story you're about to tell.
Okay. They owned a lot of my work because I didn't have gallery representation, and I would just drop off all my shit at their house, you know, all this stuff, and it's like God, I gotta go, bye, and drop off all. And he had all this work, you know, and left it outside for 30 years in the rain. It looked great. It grew lichen on it, you know. It was outside for so long. And so I have to go pick him up for the show because he had them, and his wife calls me, Gina, and says, oh, by the way, I saw some of your work. 2 of your pieces are in a garage sale in Pebble Beach, or estate sale. And I said, really? How do you know they're mine? She goes, I remember those pieces, you know, I've seen them, and we have one. And I said, like what are they? And she described them. I said, yeah. And I said, go buy them. Be first in line. You know, I don't care what they cost. Go buy them. I want them for the show because I don't have any. And so she went and bought them. They were $230 each. Excuse me, I sold them for $230 in 1982, so they held value, okay? Excuse me. My work holds value. Yeah. So she bought them, but that's not the end of it, you know? So I got those back, and then I was in a high-end vintage shop on Melrose or something, and there's another one. There's a different kind of work from the same epoch, and there it is, you know. And what was interesting, and Jerry Fox is here, and he was a dealer that showed my work, and we had some interesting things happen. And 40 years later, he goes, I got to give you some work back. And he shows up. I hadn't seen him for 40 years. He hands me this work. And so things are coming back, and just kind of like now, in the time frame of this exhibition, things are coming back that I made throughout the whole course of my working life, you know. And that's really interesting to me. That's also magical to me,
is.
you know. And
It is, like water.
and guess what? That'll stop. This show's over, that'll stop. That'll be it. That's the way it works, you know.
Oh, I see what you mean.
For me, that's the way it works.
Yeah. But amazing.
Well, I come here on the weekends to meet people, and during the week too. And there's a lot of kids here. They bring a lot of kids come through here. And the question I get most often is, "Are you famous?" "Are you Tony Marsh?" And I say, "Yeah." And they say, "Prove it." So I have to show them my driver's license. These are kids. They're great. They ask the most interesting questions. And I came to an exhibition here in 1978 that was a juried survey of ceramics, and I saw Rick Dillingham's work as a student. When I was a student, I saw it there. And it stopped me in my tracks. It was really one of the first things I saw in person that really hit me hard and did something to me, gave me permission for something. And so I was kind of hoping, I thought it was so wonderful that, X number, since 1978, X number of years later, do the math, that I got to have an exhibition here, and hopefully there would be something like that for somebody. Some young artist would see something and just go, wow. I mean, that would be great for me. I would love that. But it's been a great experience for me, far greater than anything I would have imagined. And I really owe Ron, who just left. Oh, there he is. I owe Ron a big debt of gratitude for his generosity on everything. He's been amazing. And I didn't want to do it at first because I'd seen artists struggle with retrospective exhibitions and getting back to work. They've said everything and done everything, it's been summed up and it's over, and I've seen that happen, and I was like, oh no, not me. And so I kind of didn't want to do it. Ron talked me into it, and I'm so grateful. It's been a great experience, and I can't wait to get back to work.
Excellent.
That's what I say anyway.
Yes. Yes.
I think it's all intuitive, and it's a judgment call, and there's a lot of factors forces that play on that and guide you, that are internal and external. The only time I've not really worked with a vessel is in grad school with these two. I kind of dealt with other things, and I think that if I felt like I had exhausted ideas in the vessel, which I don't feel like I have, then I would move on to something else. I feel like the ceramic, the pan-cultural, global ceramic vessel is such a fascinating idea. It's a profound idea. It's a profound human invention that it has so much territory to wander around in that's the one thing I haven't changed. I'm still bumping around in that territory, working in different ways with different ideas and things, but I'm still fascinated by that. And
well, vessel it has such a metaphorical dimension to it as well, right? So it's a physical tradition in craft, in symbolism, in all kinds of, like you said, globally throughout millennia, and yet it also has a poetic dimension. So you could kind of make anything and call it a vessel. And I don't even mean that like as a cheeky thing to say, but it's like, in a way, it wouldn't be that hard to make a case that it's if you're doing it and you're imbuing it with a story or a set of sensations, it's a vessel of those things, no matter what it looks like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually call you an emerging artist.
Yeah, an emerging artist. Okay, I love that though. Yeah, I mean, do you ever, yeah, you do. Sometimes you go too far and you smash it on the floor and you start over, right? Once in a while?
I've made things that are not vessels too, actually. I was just in a show in Germany with some stuff that were not vessels, made in the pandemic, during the pandemic. I don't worry about it too much. I kind of trust my intuitive self, and I trust my intellectual self, and I try not to get too tangled up in either of those, and I just try to flow forward and make the things I really love. And because I'm making the things I really love, this is Akansanya Cambone, by the way, up front.
Trying to get some heat, man.
Yeah,
Sorry, Tamasha. I think that's the way you stay in it for a long time. Make the things you love, that you love, You make things that you think other people love, you won't be in it for very long. Because they're not going to love it. And then what?
And then what?
Yeah.
That's excellent advice.
Yeah.
That's excellent advice. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you. Oh my God, yes.